Learning the benefits of and how to use saturation is a must for any mixing engineer, but a mistake I see engineers make over and over again is to apply this process and effect carelessly without really thinking about why they're using saturation to begin with, and this can quickly kill the punch of your mix when used incorrectly. That's why I want to explain how you can really use this effect to your benefit, and hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have a deeper understanding of how saturation works and when it should be applied in a mix. So to do that, I'll be breaking this video down into two parts. The first part will cover how saturation actually works and what it's doing to any audio you apply it to. I'll be covering both the positives and negatives this effect can have within your mix. The second part will cover a technique you can use that will actually help you to take all of the positives associated with saturation without having to sacrifice the integrity of your original unprocessed sound. But before we start, if you want to get your mixes to sound like professional songs, I recommend checking out Sage Audio's Mixing and Mastering membership. As a member, I have to say the experience is incredible. Just for signing up, you receive 20 free mastered songs per year with your own dedicated mastering engineer, unlimited mixing feedback, and access to Sage Audio University for in-depth mixing and mastering courses. But more on that at the end of the video. To begin with, we first need to learn what saturation is actually doing to our audio. And to demonstrate this, I'll be showing you a few before and after examples so you can hear and see exactly what's happening once saturation is applied to a signal. Let's first talk about how saturation affects the transients of our audio. This is particularly important to understand when applying this to transient heavy sounds like drums, or more specifically the individual shells of a drum kit. One benefit to using saturation is the way in which it can smooth out and tame harsh transients in your audio. So for example, think about the initial crack of a snare drum. This can quite often sound pokey and unpleasant when unprocessed, so applying some form of saturation will help to smooth out this initial transient. So here I've loaded up Decapitator and simply adjusted the drive knob to apply a decent amount of saturation to my snare drum sample. I'm leaving all the other settings at default so that the only thing affecting this sound is the amount of saturation that's being applied. So I'll play a quick A/B of this processing and then we'll discuss what's actually happening to the snare sound. Two big changes are occurring after the saturation has been applied. One is the initial transient is now a lot smoother in sound, and you can even see this in the waveform that I've bounced down with the saturation applied to it. Notice how on the original waveform, the very start of it has this noticeable peak before the body of the snare comes in, but on the process waveform, you can see there's hardly any visible spike remaining. So what does this mean, and how can this be a positive and a negative? Well, let's start with the positives first. Because of the way transients are affected through saturation, you can use this tool to help control anything that feels like it's jumping out too much. So like I mentioned before, a pokey sounding snare drum is a very obvious example of this. Some other examples of this could be harsh sounding vocals or plucky synth leads. All these elements could benefit from this kind of saturation process depending on the context of the song. Another benefit of this is applying it to bus processing to help glue certain sounds together. Again, because of the way saturation affects our audio, using this on groups of sounds is a great way to make them gel together and sound cohesive. For example, I have this group of acoustic guitar tracks. By their very nature, they all sound a little pokey and plucky. So let's see what applying a bit of saturation can do for this single grouped sound. If you notice, once saturation was applied, the sound was overall less harsh and also seemed more upfront. Now this is another beneficial part of saturation that I'll be going over shortly. Just listen once more and really try to focus on the initial pluck of the strings and how the saturation is smoothing this out once it's applied. However, as good as this can sound, there's also some drawbacks to consider. Because of how saturation smooths out hard transients, it's really reducing the punch in your audio source. Sometimes this could be a good thing, other times not so much. Applying saturation too liberally across lots and lots of tracks in a mix can add up to an overall weaker sounding mix. And I think this is part of the problem some people have using this tool. You probably started out using it because you've seen lots of other pro engineers doing the same thing. However, they're doing so with the knowledge of knowing how it's affecting their audio first, rather than just applying it for the sake of it. So the next time you grab a saturation plugin, I want you to first think about why you're using it. Maybe the initial transient is just jumping out of your speakers way too much, and you need a way to tame this. These would all be valid reasons to use saturation. However, if you're looking for a way to add back in punch or impact, simply applying saturation to your track is going to have the opposite effect here. Now, there is a way to actually reap the benefits of saturation while also keeping those initial transients intact, which I'll be sharing with you shortly. The other main benefit to using saturation is the added harmonics they impart into your sounds. These can range from tube designs, which generate increased levels of even order harmonics, or tape and transistor based designs, which tend to produce higher levels of odd order harmonics. It's not vital to know exactly what each and every saturation plugin you own is adding, but it helps to have a solid understanding of the typical sounds associated with these various ordered harmonics. Words that are often used to describe even order harmonics would be warmth and depth. So these can be great for subtly affecting a sound, for instance, making a digital synth sound a little more analog. Whereas words that are often used to describe odd order harmonics would be edgy and aggressive. These can be great for introducing coloration and texture, helping sounds to cut through more in a mix. So here, I've got an example where I've applied two different types of saturation to the same sound, one using tape and one using tube. I've called the first one A and the second one B. See if you can guess which is which first based on the descriptors I've already given you, and then I'll reveal the results after. So sound A was the tape saturation, and sound B was the tube saturation. Don't worry too much if it wasn't immediately obvious to you. It can be a hard thing to hear right away. Much like learning the sound of compression or picking out resonant frequencies, it can take a bit of practice to get used to. Knowing the differences in these styles of saturation and how they can affect your audio is really the key takeaway here. So now you should know how saturation affects your audio and the positives and negatives that go along with using it. You may also remember earlier when I mentioned a way of getting the benefits of saturation, along with keeping your original audio intact. And a way to do this is through the use of parallel processing. If you're at all familiar with parallel compression, it works in a very similar way. You're able to apply a heavy amount of saturation to your track and then blend this back in with the original dry signal to reap the benefits of both. So why would you want to do this? Well, one example could be on drums. Say you're happy with the punch that's already present, but you feel like they could do with some added depth or warmth. A way to add this in without reducing the initial transients in any noticeable way would be to set up a parallel track for this saturation. If you've heard other engineers use terms like crush bus, this is usually what they're referring to, although that's typically reserved for very extreme forms of saturation. In any case, if I create a parallel channel for my drums, which in my DAW I can do by right-clicking my drum track and then choosing the option Create Parallel Channel, I now have a parallel copy of this signal, which I'll be applying saturation to. I often find it's best to solo this track out so I can hear exactly what the saturation is doing to my track. So to add a bit more depth to my drums, I'm going to opt for some tube saturation because, like we discussed earlier, the even order harmonics should help to add a sense of warmth and depth to my drum track. I'll keep things simple by selecting warm tube on this plugin and then adjust the amount of saturation applied to the drive knob. It's also important to keep this effect set to 100% wet, as we're going to be blending this process signal back in with our original dry signal. So if I come down to this slider, you can see I've got it set to 100% wet. Once you're happy with the amount of drive added, you can take this out of solo and then start to blend this back in with the original dry signal. I prefer to use a gain plugin here for added control over the fader in my DAW, but you can use whichever you prefer. So I'll start by setting this parallel channel very low, and then gradually increase the gain until I feel like my drums are starting to sound warmer. Make sure to focus on the punch of the drums too, as we don't want to take this too far and lose any of this from the dry signal. So about here it's sounding good to me. I'll A/B this for you so you can hear how it sounds with and without this parallel processing. As I mentioned earlier, if you want to get your mixes to sound like professional songs, I encourage you to check out Sage Audio's mixing and mastering membership. As a member, I have to say the experience is incredible. Just for signing up, you receive 20 free mastered songs per year, with your own dedicated mastering engineer, unlimited mixing feedback, and access to Sage Audio University mixing and mastering courses, which include start to finish walkthrough sessions for various genres and 35 multi-track sessions for hands-on practice. This platform is supported by their thriving community and tight-knit network of audio engineers. Every day I see and hear great wins in the membership from both new and seasoned engineers, noticing a huge improvement in their mixers and masters after joining. Right now, you can join the membership with a 70% discount, bringing the cost down to just $15 per month. So join today and start creating mixes that sound like professional songs.